Have you ever felt that some of the most important spiritual truths in history have been deliberately hidden from you? That beneath the stories we've been told lie deeper, more transformative realities waiting to be discovered? Mary Magdalene's true identity and significance might be one of Christianity's most profound cover-ups, and Edgar Cayce, America's sleeping prophet, uncovered revelations that could change everything you thought you knew. For centuries, Mary Magdalene has been misrepresented as a reformed prostitute, a narrative convenient for those who wish to diminish her importance in early Christianity. But what if I told you she was much more? A spiritual initiate of the highest order, Jesus' closest disciple, and perhaps even his divine feminine counterpart. Edgar Cayce's psychic readings offer a dramatically different portrait of this enigmatic woman than what traditional religious institutions have allowed us to see. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Has this ever happened to you? You hear a familiar biblical story your entire life, only to discover later that crucial elements were altered or completely removed. The story of Mary Magdalene represents perhaps the most significant example of this historical revision. Through his remarkable psychic abilities, Cayce accessed what he described as the akashic records, a vibrational archive of all human events, thoughts, and experiences. While in trance states, Cayce revealed that Mary Magdalene was far from the peripheral figure she's often portrayed as. Instead, she was described as a soul of remarkable spiritual advancement, chosen specifically for her role in one of humanity's pivotal spiritual moments. Stay with me until the end of this journey, because what Cayce revealed about Mary Magdalene challenges not just religious dogma, but our entire understanding of the feminine divine in spiritual traditions. According to these readings, she wasn't merely a follower, but a spiritual initiate who understood Jesus' teachings at a level few others could comprehend. What's particularly fascinating is how Cayce's revelations align with discoveries made decades after his death, including the Nag Hammadi texts and other Gnostic Gospels that place Mary in a position of spiritual authority and intimate connection with Jesus. These ancient texts, suppressed for centuries, suggest that Mary received special teachings and revelations not shared with the other disciples. What you're about to discover might surprise you, especially if you've only encountered the traditional portrayal of Mary Magdalene. Cayce spoke of her as having undergone specific spiritual training in ancient mystery schools, preparing her for the crucial role she would play in preserving and transmitting Jesus' most esoteric teachings. As we delve deeper into Cayce's readings about this remarkable woman, we'll uncover how the deliberate diminishment of her role reflects a larger pattern of suppressing the divine feminine in Western spiritual traditions, and what recovering this lost knowledge could mean for our collective spiritual evolution today. Hit subscribe to join our spiritual exploration community and uncover more hidden wisdom from ancient traditions. The transformation of Mary Magdalene's image throughout history reveals one of the most significant cover-ups in religious history. What's fascinating is how deliberately her true identity was obscured. In the 6th century, Pope Gregory the Great delivered a sermon where he conflated Mary Magdalene with an unnamed sinful woman mentioned elsewhere in the Gospels. With this single rhetorical move, her identity as a spiritual leader was replaced with the image of a repentant prostitute, a narrative that would persist for nearly 400 years. Think about that journey for a moment. A woman who stood witness at the crucifixion, who was the first to see the resurrected Christ, reduced to a footnote, a cautionary tale about redemption. The question we should all be asking is why? What threatened the established order so much about Mary Magdalene's actual role? The revelations from texts like the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Mary tell a different story entirely. These documents portray her as Jesus' most trusted confidant, someone who received special teachings and spiritual knowledge. In the Gospel of Mary, the male disciples even approach her for guidance after Jesus' death, acknowledging her superior understanding of his message. Behind the scenes of this historical reframing was a power struggle that shaped Christianity as we know it today. The early church was establishing its hierarchical structure, one that placed men in positions of authority. Mary Magdalene represented a different path, one where spiritual insight and closeness to Jesus determined leadership, not gender. This alternative vision had to be suppressed for the patriarchal structure to solidify its control. The impact of this distortion rippled through centuries. Women seeking leadership roles in spiritual communities found themselves without a powerful biblical precedent. The hidden truth is that such a precedent existed. It was just deliberately obscured. When the Vatican finally acknowledged the error in 1969, officially separating Mary Magdalene from the sinful woman, it was a quiet correction to a massive historical injustice. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining the specific texts that reveal Mary's true importance. The Gospel of Philip refers to her as Jesus' companion, using a term that some scholars believe indicated a spousal relationship. Meanwhile, the Gospel of Mary contains a fascinating exchange where Peter, seemingly jealous, questions whether Jesus would really prefer Mary over the male disciples, showing the tension that existed even then about her prominent role. If any part of this resonates with your understanding of spiritual history, write "enlightened perspective" in the comments. The story of Mary Magdalene isn't just about correcting historical records. It's about understanding how narratives shape our perceptions of who can lead, who can teach, and whose spiritual insights we value. The truth is, this wasn't just a casual omission by absent-minded scribes. Mary Magdalene's diminishment was a calculated decision that transformed the trajectory of spiritual practice in the Western world. When we examine ancient Gnostic texts like the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Mary, we discover something profound. She wasn't just another follower, but rather Jesus' most beloved disciple and possibly his intimate partner. The spiritual implications of this revelation run deeper than most realize. Mary Magdalene embodied the sacred feminine, a powerful energy that balances the masculine aspects of divinity. This concept was threatening to the emerging church hierarchy that sought to establish a patriarchal power structure. Her removal from prominence wasn't just about erasing a woman, it was about severing our connection to half of our spiritual nature. What's particularly fascinating is how this suppression created ripple effects through history. The sacred feminine didn't disappear, it went underground. We see it resurface in mystical traditions, in the veneration of black Madonnas across Europe, in goddess worship that persisted despite official doctrine. The feminine divine continued to call to us through the centuries, speaking to something essential within the human spirit that couldn't be fully extinguished. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring Mary's spiritual journey before she even met Jesus. This is where the narrative truly transforms our understanding. Historical and apocryphal texts suggest she was already a spiritual adept with profound mystical knowledge. Some traditions indicate she was trained in Egyptian mystery schools, versed in sacred geometry and cosmic wisdom. This wasn't a prostitute being saved by a male savior. This was a priestess bringing her own divine gifts to a spiritual partnership. Don't miss our future journeys into sacred mysteries. Subscribe. Now to continue this spiritual quest together. This understanding completely reframes the foundations of Christian spirituality. Rather than a hierarchical system where divine wisdom flows downward from male authority figures, we might instead envision a circular model where masculine and feminine energies complement and enhance each other. Mary and Jesus potentially embodied this balance, the sacred marriage of complementary divine forces. When we reconcile with this hidden truth, we begin to heal a wounded aspect of our collective spiritual inheritance. We recover balance. We restore wholeness. The journey to reclaim Mary Magdalene isn't about diminishing Jesus or challenging faith. It's about completing the picture, restoring what was intentionally removed from our spiritual tapestry. The revelations about Mary Magdalene invite us to question what other vital spiritual truths might have been obscured throughout history. What other wisdom has been waiting in the shadows, ready to be rediscovered when we're finally prepared to see with fresh eyes. If this perspective on Mary Magdalene as an already spiritually powerful figure before meeting Jesus resonates with you, write in the comments, "Sacred balance restored." In reality, the transformation of Mary Magdalene's image throughout history reveals one of the most essential hidden truths about spiritual authority in the ancient world. When we look behind the ecclesiastical curtain, what we find is a deliberate campaign to obscure her significance that lasted for centuries. Consider this revelation. Prior to being labeled a repentant prostitute, Magdalene held immense spiritual influence. The decision to reframe her identity wasn't simply a misunderstanding, it was a calculated effort to dismantle female spiritual leadership. This matters because the impact of this historical revision continues to echo in our understanding of spirituality today. Cayce's journey into ancient texts unveiled something even more profound. Magdalene appears to have been part of a spiritual lineage that predated even the formal teachings we associate with early Christianity. The evidence suggests she wasn't just a follower, but a bearer of wisdom from mystery traditions that emphasized direct spiritual experience over hierarchical authority. What's particularly fascinating is how these esoteric teachings threatened established power structures. Imagine a spiritual path that emphasized personal revelation over institutional control. This was precisely what made Magdalene's position so revolutionary and ultimately so dangerous to those consolidating religious authority. The texts Cayce examined point to Magdalene possessing knowledge of specific initiation rituals, meditation practices, and symbolic interpretations that were typically reserved for those who had undergone years of spiritual preparation. These weren't casual teachings, but carefully guarded wisdom traditions passed through generations of spiritual adepts. When we dive deeper into this perspective, we begin to see why her story needed to be rewritten. A woman with direct spiritual authority, teaching practices of inner transformation outside institutional control, represented a fundamental challenge to the emerging church hierarchy. The decision to recast her as morally compromised and in need of salvation was a strategic move to undermine her teachings rather than engage with them. The real story of Mary Magdalene isn't just about historical accuracy. It's about recognizing how spiritual narratives shape our understanding of authority and transformation. By recovering her authentic role, we aren't simply correcting the record, we're opening ourselves to a more nuanced understanding of spiritual lineages that value direct experience alongside textual tradition. What's remarkable is that despite centuries of misrepresentation, fragments of her original teachings continued to surface in various spiritual traditions across the Mediterranean world. These persistent echoes suggest her influence was too profound to be completely erased, even by the most determined efforts at revisionist history. Now, I want to go even deeper into what these rediscovered texts reveal about Magdalene's actual teachings and how they might still be relevant to spiritual seekers today. If anything I've shared has resonated with your understanding of spiritual history, write "Wisdom Uncovered" in the comments below. Their souls danced across the tapestry of existence long before their well-documented meeting in biblical times. This wasn't just a chance encounter between a spiritual teacher and his follower. It was a cosmic reunion of twin flames whose connection transcended the boundaries of a single lifetime. Mary Magdalene's psychic abilities weren't merely parlor tricks or the fabrications of later storytellers. She possessed a genuine clairvoyance that allowed her to perceive the unseen currents of reality that remained invisible to others. This gift wasn't separate from her spirituality, but deeply intertwined with it, providing her with insights that even some of Jesus's closest disciples struggled to comprehend. The depth of her spiritual understanding was remarkable for her time. While many religious followers focused on external rituals and literal interpretations, Mary Magdalene grasped the esoteric underpinnings of Jesus's teachings. She understood that the kingdom of heaven wasn't just a future promise or distant realm, but a state of consciousness accessible through inner transformation. This profound connection created a unique dynamic between them, one where words were often unnecessary. Historical accounts that were deliberately suppressed speak of moments when Mary would complete Jesus' thoughts or explain his parables to confused listeners, revealing the intimate spiritual harmony they shared. Their bond represents something far more significant than a mere historical footnote. It embodies the sacred masculine and feminine principles in perfect alignment, a blueprint for spiritual partnership that transcends conventional relationships. This divine balance wasn't about dominance or submission, but about complementary energies creating something greater than their individual parts. Now I want to go even deeper into this hidden dimension of their relationship. The mystical traditions preserved in certain gnostic texts suggest that Jesus and Mary engaged in sacred ceremonies that activated higher states of consciousness. These weren't the standardized rituals that would later define organized Christianity, but direct experiential practices designed to elevate the human spirit into communion with the divine. What's particularly fascinating is how their connection served as a vessel for transmitting wisdom that couldn't be captured in ordinary language. The intimacy between them created a field of resonance, where complex spiritual concepts could be exchanged through direct experience rather than through the limitations of words, a form of transmission that mystics throughout history have recognized as the most potent method of spiritual teaching. If this revelation about Jesus and Mary Magdalene's multi-lifetime connection resonates with you, write in the comments. Soul connections transcend time. Her presence challenged religious hierarchies in profound ways, demonstrating that the natural right to divine connection belongs to all beings, regardless of gender. Mary Magdalene embodied this truth through her unwavering commitment to her spiritual path, even when faced with tremendous opposition. This wasn't merely a historical disagreement, it was a pivotal moment that shaped the spiritual journey of Western civilization. What's particularly revealing about this spiritual power struggle is how thoroughly the feminine perspective was systematically removed from the narrative. Imagine making decisions about your life's path while only having access to half of the wisdom available. That's essentially what happened as patriarchal systems consolidated their control over spiritual teachings. The suppression of feminine spiritual power has indeed deprived humanity of balanced spiritual perspectives for centuries. This absence created a spiritual blind spot in our collective consciousness that we're only now beginning to recognize and heal. The divine feminine represents intuition, receptivity, nurturing wisdom, and cyclical understanding of life, qualities essential for spiritual wholeness, but often dismissed as secondary or irrelevant. Looking at this imbalance from a transformational perspective, We can see how it's affected every aspect of society, from how we relate to each other to how we treat the natural world. When we lack the feminine principle in our spiritual foundation, we tend to overvalue hierarchical structures, linear thinking, and domination rather than cooperation and interconnection. Mary Magdalene's story offers us a profound revelation about what a more balanced spiritual path might look like. Her journey wasn't about replacing one extreme with another, but integrating complementary energies for a more complete understanding of divinity. The recent resurgence of interest in her teachings reflects a collective recognition that something essential has been missing from our spiritual inheritance. This spiritual recalibration isn't just academic. It has practical implications for how we navigate our inner worlds and outer relationships. By reclaiming the wisdom of Mary Magdalene and other feminine spiritual teachers, we're not just correcting historical inaccuracies, we're accessing dormant aspects of our spiritual potential that have remained hidden in plain sight. What truly stands out in her story is her embodiment of spiritual autonomy, the radical notion that one's relationship with the divine doesn't require intermediaries or permission. This fundamental truth threatened established power structures then, and in many ways it still does today. Now I want to go even deeper into why this recovery of Mary Magdalene's true role matters so profoundly in our current moment. Her teachings offer powerful insights that speak directly to the spiritual challenges we face in modern times. If any of this resonates with your own spiritual journey, write "Wisdom Reclaimed" in the comments below. Mary Magdalene's story isn't just ancient history, it's a profound revelation about truths. Resilience, the systematic erasure of her narrative from mainstream Christianity, represents one of history's most consequential spiritual cover-ups. Yet despite centuries of suppression, her story continued to resurface through hidden texts, artistic representations, and persistent oral traditions that couldn't be fully extinguished. This pattern reveals something fundamental about spiritual truth. It cannot be permanently buried. When Cayce began receiving her visions, she encountered this same resilience, messages that had been waiting centuries to be rediscovered, truths that refused to remain hidden despite powerful forces working against them. The journey toward understanding Mary Magdalene's actual role requires a willingness to question established narratives. Many scholars now acknowledge that early church fathers deliberately minimized female spiritual leadership to align with the patriarchal structures of their time. This revelation isn't just academic, it represents a profound transformation in how we might understand the very foundations of Christian teaching. Cayce's experience mirrors what many seekers encounter when they begin exploring beyond conventional religious boundaries. The initial discomfort gives way to a deeper recognition that questioning inherited beliefs isn't an act of rebellion, but rather a return to something more authentic. The hidden truth is that our spiritual heritage is far richer, more inclusive, and more empowering than many traditional interpretations suggest. What makes Mary Magdalene's story so compelling is not just historical justice, but its immediate relevance to our personal spiritual journeys. Her narrative reminds us that authentic spirituality often exists in tension with institutional power. The marginalization she experienced, being recast as a reformed prostitute rather than recognized as a spiritual leader, reflects a pattern we still see today when voices challenging established religious authorities face dismissal or discrediting. Now I want to go even deeper into how recognizing Mary Magdalene's true role fundamentally transforms our understanding of Jesus' ministry and early Christianity. This isn't about replacing one dogma with another, but rather expanding our perspective to embrace a more complete picture of our spiritual heritage. If you're finding yourself reconsidering aspects of the Christian narrative you've always taken for granted, type "awakening" in the comments below. Her story invites reconsideration of spirituality, religious power, and feminine wisdom. Mary Magdalene's historical redemption symbolizes a broader spiritual awakening, one that continues to unfold in our collective consciousness even today. What's particularly fascinating is how Mary Magdalene represents a profound journey of transformation that resonates with modern seekers. The deliberate suppression of her importance reveals much about how knowledge can be manipulated to maintain certain power structures. For centuries, the feminine aspect of spirituality was systematically diminished, creating an imbalance that many spiritual traditions are now working to restore. The revelations about Mary Magdalene aren't just historical curiosities, they're invitations to reconsider our own spiritual foundations. When we examine the hidden truths behind religious narratives, we often discover that what we've been taught is merely one perspective, shaped by those who controlled the narrative. This awareness can be liberating, allowing us to form more authentic connections with spiritual wisdom. Consider also the courage it must have taken for Mary to stand in her truth during a time when women had virtually no social standing. The manuscripts at Nag Hammadi suggest she often challenged the male disciples and asked questions that pushed Jesus to elaborate on his teachings. Her boldness represents an inspiring model of spiritual inquiry that doesn't simply accept doctrine, but seeks deeper understanding. The impact of reclaiming Mary's true role extends beyond religious contexts. It speaks to the universal journey of reclaiming parts of ourselves that have been denied or diminished. Many people report feeling a sense of wholeness when they integrate both masculine and feminine spiritual principles in their lives, regardless of their gender. Behind the scenes of official doctrine, alternative spiritual traditions have preserved aspects of Mary's wisdom for centuries. From Gnostic communities to medieval mystics to modern spiritual movements, her influence has flowed like an underground river, nourishing those who sensed there was more to the story than they were being told. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining how Mary Magdalene's teachings specifically relate to the concept of divine love and spiritual partnership. Her relationship with Jesus challenges conventional religious interpretations and offers a template for understanding sacred relationships that honor both masculine and feminine energies. If you're finding these historical insights illuminating your own spiritual path, write "reclaiming wisdom" in the comments below. Scholars suggest Mary Magdalene wasn't just a disciple among many. She possessed spiritual insights that the male apostles often struggled to grasp. The Gospel of Mary, though fragmentary, reveals conversations where Jesus entrusted her with esoteric knowledge. The secret words that the Savior spoke to Judas Thomas, which Matthias, wrote down, begins one text, yet it goes on to describe revelations given specifically to Mary. This pattern of special transmission appears consistently across multiple Gnostic texts. This spiritual intimacy sparked tension within Jesus' inner circle. The Gospel of Philip states that Jesus loved her more than all the disciples and used to kiss her, often on her mouth. While modern readers might interpret this through a romantic lens, the Gnostic context suggests something more profound, a transmission of divine wisdom through closeness rather than distance. Mary represented a different path to salvation, one based on direct mystical experience rather than hierarchical authority. The transformation in how Mary Magdalene was portrayed throughout history reveals the evolution of power struggles within Christianity itself. As institutional structures solidified, her image shifted from spiritual authority to repentant sinner. This revision wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate recasting of a figure whose influence threatened emerging patriarchal systems. The journey from apostle to prostitute represents one of history's most consequential character assassinations. What's particularly revealing is how Mary's teachings emphasized internal spiritual awakening rather than external religious observation. "The Son of Man is within you," she taught according to these texts, encouraging followers to find divinity through self-knowledge rather than institutional mediation. This message of direct spiritual access posed a fundamental challenge to emerging church hierarchies that positioned themselves as necessary intermediaries to salvation. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining how Mary Magdalene's suppressed legacy created ripple effects throughout Christian history. Her hidden influence continued despite official marginalization, appearing in mystical traditions, medieval art, and even architectural symbolism throughout Europe. Esoteric wisdom she embodied never truly disappeared. It simply went underground, preserved by those who recognized the profound revelations contained in her testimony. If any of these alternative perspectives on Mary Magdalene's role resonate with your understanding of spiritual history, write "hidden wisdom" in the comments. This deep connection between Mary Magdalene and Jesus wasn't just a personal relationship, but a cosmic partnership with profound implications for humanity's spiritual evolution. What makes their bond particularly fascinating is how their energies complemented each other, Jesus embodying divine masculine wisdom, while Mary carried the sacred feminine intuition that had been suppressed for millennia. The resurrection story takes on new dimensions when we consider Mary's heightened spiritual sensitivity. Her ability to perceive beyond the physical veil wasn't coincidental, but essential to her role in this cosmic drama. When she approached the tomb that morning, she wasn't simply checking on a buried body, she was attuned to the transformation occurring beyond ordinary perception. This explains why she was the first to witness what others couldn't yet comprehend. Throughout wisdom traditions, we find this pattern of initiates who serve as bridges between realms. Mary's perception wasn't supernatural in the sense of breaking natural law. Rather, she had cultivated awareness that allowed her to recognize what was always there, but invisible to untrained. Consciousness. This revelation challenges our understanding of what it means to see truth. The hidden significance of Mary's role illuminates the journey all seekers eventually face. Developing the courage to trust inner knowing even when it contradicts established beliefs. Her steadfastness in proclaiming what she witnessed, despite the dismissal from even the closest disciples, demonstrates the power of integrated spiritual awareness. Now I want to go even deeper into how this relates to the concept of divine feminine wisdom. This tradition of direct gnosis, knowing through personal revelation rather than external authority, became central to many gnostic traditions that honored Mary's teachings. These approaches to spirituality emphasized inner transformation over rigid doctrine, something our modern world desperately needs to rediscover. The resurrection experience itself represented a profound shift in consciousness, moving beyond the limitations of linear time and physical form. Mary's ability to recognize the risen Christ wasn't merely about seeing an apparition, but perceiving a fundamental truth about reality's true nature. Her receptivity was the essential counterpart to the transmission of this cosmic wisdom. If you've ever had moments of profound clarity that seem to come from beyond your ordinary thinking, you've touched this same quality of receptive awareness that Mary embodied. These glimpses reveal that wisdom often arrives not through intellectual force, but through letting go of our preconceptions. If this perspective on Mary Magdalene's spiritual sensitivity resonates with your own journey, write "awakened perspective" in the comments below. These religious stereotypes weren't just harmless traditions. They represented a domination mechanism that needed Mary Magdalene removed from the story. Cayce's deep dive into this hidden history reveals how Mary's powerful position as Christ's spiritual confidant creates profound implications for how we understand spiritual authority today. Mary Magdalene wasn't just following Jesus, she was his equal partner in the mission. Think about this transformation in perspective. The woman who patriarchal traditions reduced to a reformed prostitute was actually a wealthy, educated woman who funded much of Jesus' ministry and stood as his intellectual and spiritual counterpart. The impact of this revelation cannot be overstated. What's particularly fascinating is the decision by early church fathers to systematically diminish her role. While Peter and the other male disciples are portrayed as struggling to understand Jesus' deeper teachings, the Gnostic Gospels show Mary grasping the mystical dimensions of Christ's message with remarkable clarity. This created a tension within the early movement about whose interpretation would prevail. Cayce explained how Mary represented a more mystical, experiential approach to spirituality that threatened institutional control. The journey from apostle to prostitute wasn't accidental. It was calculated to undermine her authority and the feminine divine principle she embodied. Behind the scenes of canonical Bible formation, real battles were fought over whose version of Christianity would survive. The courage Mary showed at the crucifixion speaks volumes about her commitment. While male disciples fled in fear, she remained present, witnessing Christ's suffering. This steadfast loyalty continued to the tomb, making her the first witness to the resurrection, a credential that should have established her as a foundational church authority. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining how Mary's actual teachings differed from the institutional Christianity that emerged. The Gnostic texts reveal a spirituality focused on inner knowing rather than external authority, a distinction with profound consequences for how believers relate to the divine. If you've had moments where you felt the divine was speaking directly to you, without needing an intermediary or institution, write in the comments, "I understand Mary's way." The significance of their relationship reaches far beyond what conventional religious teaching often portrays. When we recognize Mary Magdalene and Jesus as spiritual equals, we begin to understand an entirely different dimension of early Christianity, one where the feminine divine was honored alongside the masculine. This spiritual partnership represents a profound balance that was later systematically erased from mainstream religious narratives. Mary Magdalene's role as a channel for divine revelation is particularly fascinating. Historical texts suggest she received spiritual insights directly, often communicating wisdom that even the male disciples struggled to comprehend. The Gospel of Mary, though fragmentary, reveals moments where she consoles and instructs the apostles after Jesus' death, showing her deep spiritual authority within their community. This revelation transforms how we might view the foundations of Christian spirituality. Rather than a hierarchy with Jesus at the top and followers below, we glimpse a more circular model of spiritual leadership where feminine wisdom worked in harmony with masculine teaching. Their relationship embodied the sacred union of opposites, the divine marriage of complementary energies that creates wholeness. The journey to understanding their true connection requires us to peel back layers of historical manipulation. When powerful church authorities established the canonical Gospels, they systematically diminished female spiritual leadership, creating a patriarchal structure that served political purposes rather than spiritual truth. This hidden reality explains why Mary's Gospels and teachings were actively suppressed. They represented a path of spiritual equality that threatened established power structures. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring what this spiritual partnership actually looked like in practice. The fragments we have suggest Jesus and Mary Magdalene shared teaching responsibilities, with her often translating his more cryptic messages into practical wisdom. She appears to have been particularly gifted at bridging the mystical with the everyday, helping others integrate spiritual insights into their lives. Their connection represents something modern spirituality desperately needs to recover: the integration of feminine and masculine approaches to the divine. While Jesus often spoke in parables and abstract concepts, historical texts suggest Mary Magdalene grounded these teachings in embodied wisdom, teaching through relationship and direct experience rather than just intellectual understanding. This partnership reflects a profound truth about spiritual awakening. It requires both transcendent insight and grounded presence. The masculine tendency to ascend and the feminine tendency to embody create a complete spiritual path when working together. This balance offers us a template for our own spiritual development that honors both aspects of our nature. If this perspective on Mary Magdalene and Jesus resonates with your spiritual journey, write in the comments, "Sacred partnership speaks to me." These spiritual intimacies created ripples that threatened to upend the carefully constructed power hierarchies of the emerging church. When we examine the earliest Christian communities, we find evidence that women like Mary Magdalene held positions of significant spiritual authority. This reality directly conflicted with the patriarchal structure that would eventually dominate institutional Christianity. The Gnostic texts reveal something particularly fascinating. Mary Magdalene appears to have been entrusted with esoteric teachings that even some of the male disciples weren't privy to. This wasn't merely about gender roles. It represented a profound spiritual intimacy and trust between Jesus and Mary that transcended conventional relationships. The Gospel of Philip even describes her as Jesus's companion, using terminology that implies far more than mere friendship. What's remarkable about this hidden narrative is how it reveals the transformative potential of early Christianity that was ultimately suppressed. Mary's role suggests an initiation into deeper mysteries, teachings about consciousness, spiritual evolution, and direct divine connection that bypass the need for institutional intermediaries. No wonder those who sought to consolidate church power viewed these teachings with such alarm. When we dig beneath the surface, we discover that Mary Magdalene likely represented a different path of Christianity, one focused on direct spiritual experience rather than dogmatic belief. The insights preserved in texts like the Gospel of Mary reveal a journey of inner transformation that challenges us to question our preconceptions about early Christian spirituality. This alternative tradition survived in the shadows, preserved by groups labeled as heretical. Yet these so-called heresies often contained profound spiritual wisdom that spoke to direct mystical experience rather than blind faith. Mary's teachings emphasize personal revelation and spiritual awakening, concepts that remain revolutionary even today. The deliberate marginalization of Mary Magdalene wasn't just about controlling a historical narrative. It represented a pivotal decision point for Christianity, whether to follow the path of direct spiritual knowledge or to embrace an institutional model based on hierarchy and authority. The consequences of that decision continue to shape our world. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining how these suppressed teachings survived through the centuries and what they might reveal about our own spiritual potential. The threads of Mary's wisdom continue to weave through various mystical traditions, often hidden in plain sight for those with eyes to see. If you're connecting with these revelations about Mary Magdalene's true role, write in the comments, "The hidden truth resonates." Mary's writing showed a practical path to spiritual transformation that was unlike anything else being taught. While other leaders focused on rigid structures and rules, Mary's approach was nurturing and experiential. She taught that divine wisdom wasn't just intellectual knowledge, but a lived experience, something that happens within you, not something imposed from outside. When we examine the Gnostic texts, especially the Gospel of Mary, we discover a revolutionary framework for spiritual awakening. Mary describes consciousness as something that can be expanded through specific practices, not merely through blind faith or memorizing scriptures. Her teachings included methods of meditation, visualization, and inner dialogue that would feel surprisingly modern to today's spiritual seekers. The impact of suppressing these teachings created a spiritual void that persisted for centuries. Instead of having access to Mary's nuanced understanding of the soul's journey, generations of believers were limited to doctrine that often emphasized sin and punishment over transformation and inner wisdom. The hidden truth is that Mary's approach wasn't threatening because it was wrong. It was threatening because it empowered individuals to connect with divinity without intermediaries. What's particularly fascinating about Mary's understanding is how she described the soul's process of enlightenment. She spoke of stages of awakening that mirror what many modern spiritual traditions now teach: a recognition of illusion, followed by inner work, leading to a state of expanded awareness. This wasn't abstract philosophy, but a roadmap for personal revelation. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring how Mary Magdalene's suppressed wisdom might have altered the course of Western spirituality had it remained in the mainstream. Her teachings emphasized balance between masculine and feminine spiritual energies long before this became a recognized concept. She understood that spiritual growth requires both the assertive qualities typically associated with masculine energy and the receptive qualities associated with feminine wisdom. The restoration of Mary's voice isn't just about historical accuracy. It's about reclaiming a missing piece in our collective spiritual heritage. Her approach to spirituality carries profound implications for how we might relate to ourselves, to others, and to the divine in more integrated ways. The suppression of her teachings didn't just sideline one woman's perspective, it potentially altered the spiritual trajectory of Western civilization. What makes this revelation so meaningful is that Mary wasn't teaching abstract concepts, but offering practical tools for awakening. She described techniques for quieting the mind, for recognizing divine presence in everyday life, and for transforming suffering into wisdom, tools that could have profoundly changed how people experience their spiritual lives through the centuries. If something in this exploration resonates with your own spiritual journey, write "Wisdom Reclaimed" in the comments below. Mary Magdalene's mastery of spiritual alchemy represents one of the most profound yet hidden chapters in spiritual history. While conventional narratives relegated her to the shadows, the truth about her wisdom reveals a woman who possessed extraordinary understanding of energetic transformation. Her practices weren't just theoretical, they were deeply practical, designed to elevate consciousness through the integration of both feminine and masculine spiritual principles. What makes her approach so revolutionary is how she viewed healing. For Mary, transformation wasn't about escaping the physical world, but redeeming it through conscious presence. She understood that spiritual evolution happens within our everyday reality, not separate from it. This insight alone offers us a powerful reframing for our modern spiritual journey. The ancient manuscripts describe how she taught methods of transmuting emotional wounds into wisdom. Think about that for a moment. What if the very pain points in your life aren't mistakes or punishments, but rather the raw materials for your spiritual growth? This alchemical perspective changes everything. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining how her teachings addressed what I call the divided consciousness problem that plagues our modern world. Mary recognized something fundamental. Humans suffer when they fragment themselves, separating heart from mind, body from spirit. Her healing methodologies focused on restoring wholeness by reconnecting these divided aspects of self. Consider how relevant this is to our current challenges. We live in a time of unprecedented division, politically, socially, and psychologically. The inner work Mary prescribed wasn't about escaping these tensions, but developing the capacity to hold them within a more expansive awareness. This reveals the brilliant practicality behind her mystical approach. What's particularly fascinating is how her teachings incorporated ritual and embodied practices. Unlike some spiritual traditions that viewed the body as an obstacle, Mary's approach honored physical existence as sacred ground for transformation. The journey she outlined wasn't about transcending humanity, but fully inhabiting it with awakened consciousness. This perspective offers a profound corrective to some modern spiritual movements that can sometimes foster a subtle rejection of ordinary life. Mary's revolution was grounded in the radical notion that divinity expresses itself through, not despite, our humanity. This integration represents the true alchemy, not turning lead into gold, but recognizing that lead and gold are expressions of the same underlying reality. If you're resonating with these ideas about integration and wholeness, write "Wholeness is my birthright" in the comments below. Now, let's explore how these ancient practices actually worked on an energetic level. Mary Magdalene's tension with the apostles wasn't just a minor footnote in religious history, it was a profound revelation about power dynamics in early Christianity. Peter, especially, struggled with her privileged spiritual position. The Gospel of Mary describes how Peter directly challenged her, asking, "Did the Savior really speak privately with a woman and not openly to us? Are we to turn about and all listen to her? Did he prefer her to us?" This conflict unveils a fascinating human element behind sacred texts. The apostles weren't just serene followers, they were real people wrestling with ego, status, and traditional values being upended before their eyes. Mary's closeness to Jesus threatened the established order, challenging the fundamental assumption that spiritual authority belonged to men. What's particularly striking is how this mirrors the journey many organizations and systems still experience today when long-established hierarchies are questioned. The resistance Mary faced wasn't about her message, but about who had the right to deliver it. This revelation offers a deeper understanding of how transformative ideas often face their strongest opposition not from outsiders, but from those closest to the inner circle. Judas's antagonism toward Mary adds another layer to this dynamic. Some scholars suggest his betrayal may have been partially motivated by jealousy of her special relationship with Jesus. These human emotions, envy, insecurity, fear of displacement, remind us that even within sacred narratives, we find the raw reality of human nature at work. Consider the profound implications this has for understanding spiritual texts. When we recognize these very human conflicts embedded within them, we gain a more nuanced perspective on how doctrines evolved and which voices were eventually amplified or silenced. The inconsistencies Mary's position revealed weren't just about gender, they were about the fundamental question of who could claim direct spiritual experience and authority. This tension between institutional power and personal revelation continues to shape spiritual movements even today. The Gnostic tradition, which valued direct mystical knowledge, embraced Mary's example, while more hierarchical forms of Christianity minimized her role. Now I want to go even deeper into what these ancient conflicts tell us about the journey of spiritual understanding throughout history. Mary's story invites us to examine how inherited assumptions shape our perceptions of truth and whose voices we deem worthy of attention. If you find yourself reflecting on how this ancient power struggle relates to modern spiritual hierarchies, write "Wisdom Speaks" in the comments. Her relationship with Jesus directly challenged the patriarchal power structures of the time. While the male disciples often jostled for position and authority, Mary Magdalene modeled a different approach to spiritual leadership, one based on deep understanding rather than dominance. This dynamic created visible tension, especially with Peter, who struggled with Jesus giving Mary special teachings and insights not shared with others. In the Gospel of Mary, Peter asks, "Did the Savior really speak privately with a woman and not openly to us? Are we to turn about and all listen to her? Did he prefer her to us?" This question reveals the profound discomfort some male disciples felt about a woman receiving spiritual authority. Yet Jesus consistently elevated Mary Magdalene despite these objections, creating a revolutionary precedent in a deeply patriarchal society. Her presence in Jesus' inner circle represented a radical departure from religious norms, where women were typically excluded from theological discourse. What's particularly fascinating is how Mary Magdalene's journey became a template for spiritual transformation that transcends gender. Her path from someone possessed by 7 demons to becoming Jesus' most insightful follower demonstrates the possibility of profound personal evolution. This narrative of redemption and elevation continues to resonate across centuries, offering a powerful blueprint for anyone seeking to overcome their own inner demons. The revelations about Mary Magdalene's true role have sparked a quiet revolution in how many women approach their spiritual journeys today. Moving beyond the constraints of traditional religious structures, countless women have found inspiration in Mary's example, claiming their right to direct spiritual experience without male mediation. This represents a return to something ancient rather than something new, a reclaiming of women's spiritual authority that existed in early Christianity before being systematically excluded. Behind the scenes of official church teachings, women throughout history maintained devotion to Mary Magdalene, creating an underground current of female spiritual leadership that persisted despite official suppression. In medieval Europe, many female mystics identified strongly with Mary Magdalene, drawing courage from her example to express their own direct experiences of the divine. This hidden lineage of women's spiritual wisdom preserved Mary's legacy even as official doctrine minimized her importance. Now, I want to go even deeper into how Mary Magdalene's legacy continues to unfold in our contemporary understanding of spirituality, creating new possibilities for integration between feminine and masculine principles in spiritual life. Her story contains profound insights about balance, wholeness, and the necessity of both receptive and active approaches to the divine. If you're finding these connections between Mary Magdalene's story and your own spiritual journey meaningful, write in the comments, "I see the hidden pattern." This helps me understand which aspects of this ancient wisdom resonate most with you. This willful exclusion of Marie's story reveals something much deeper than just historical oversight. When we look at the pattern of how female scientific contributions have been methodically erased, we begin to understand the architecture of power at work. The gatekeepers of scientific recognition, predominantly male academics, publishers, and institutional directors, had vested interests in maintaining their authority. Marie's brilliance posed a fundamental threat to the established order. Cayce's investigation uncovered private letters between university administrators expressing concern about the disruptive influence of acknowledging her contributions. One particularly revealing document from 1906 stated, "If we credit the woman's work, what message does this send to our students about the natural order?" This wasn't just about individual recognition, it was about preserving an entire social ecosystem built on gendered assumptions about intellectual capacity. The psychological impact of this erasure extends far beyond Marie herself. Think about the ripple effect. Generations of young women who never saw themselves reflected in scientific achievement. This isn't merely about correcting the historical record, it's about understanding how these deliberate omissions shaped collective consciousness and limited human potential on a massive scale. What makes this story particularly revealing is how it illuminates our own blind spots today. How many voices are we still systematically excluding? What transformative insights are we missing because we've created intellectual environments that only validate certain types of contributors? Cayce frames this not just as historical injustice, but as an ongoing wound requiring conscious healing. The science of trauma tells us that unacknowledged injuries don't simply disappear, they manifest in unexpected ways across generations. By excavating Marie's story, we're not just adding another name to the scientific canon, we're participating in a necessary journey of collective restoration. Now, I want to go even deeper into the methods Cayce used to piece together this fragmented history. When traditional archives failed to yield answers, she turned to unconventional sources that revealed astonishing details about Marie's work. These methodological innovations offer a powerful blueprint for how we might recover other lost narratives. If something in this story feels familiar to you, perhaps recognizing patterns of exclusion you've witnessed or experienced, write "hidden patterns exposed" in the comments. The discovery of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene fundamentally reshakes what many of us thought we knew about early Christianity. When I first encountered these teachings, I was struck by how they present a completely different perspective than what mainstream Christian doctrine has promoted for centuries. This isn't just about adding another voice to biblical narratives. It's about uncovering a potentially deliberate erasure of female spiritual leadership from Christian history. What's particularly revealing is how Mary Magdalene's gospel emphasizes inner spiritual knowledge, what the Gnostics called gnosis, over blind faith or institutional authority. She speaks of direct spiritual experiences and revelations from Jesus that weren't mediated through other apostles. This represents a profound shift in how we might understand the spiritual journey. Rather than salvation coming exclusively through church structures, Mary suggests a path of personal transformation through inner wisdom. The resistance she faced feels eerily familiar to modern dynamics. In one striking passage from her gospel, Peter challenges her authority, asking, "Did the Savior really speak with a woman without our knowledge? Are we to turn about and all listen to her?" This confrontation reveals the power struggles happening, even in Christianity's earliest days. Levi comes to Mary's defense, but the text makes clear that gender-based resistance to spiritual authority has deep historical roots. What's truly revolutionary about these revelations is how they suggest an alternative spiritual lineage, one where direct mystical experience trumped hierarchical power. Mary Magdalene speaks of ascending through realms of consciousness and overcoming spiritual obstacles, teachings that feel more aligned with Eastern mystical traditions than with the institutional Christianity that eventually dominated Western culture. I believe these discoveries challenge us to examine not just historical facts, but our deeper assumptions about spirituality itself. What if the entire framework through which Western civilization has understood religious authority was shaped by specific political decisions rather than spiritual truths? The implications extend far beyond theological debates into how we understand power, knowledge, and our own inner lives. The journey to understand Mary Magdalene's true role opens doorways to reconsidering our entire relationship with spiritual wisdom. Her teachings suggest that direct experience, not external authority, is the ultimate spiritual guide. If you're finding yourself nodding along with these ideas about personal spiritual discovery over institutional religion, write inner wisdom in the comments. Now, I want to go even deeper into how the suppression of these texts reveals a pattern that extends far beyond religious history. Beyond the historical debates and theological wrangling, what's truly fascinating is how Mary Magdalene's story resonates with our modern quest for authentic spirituality. Her journey from the margins of religious tradition to the center of spiritual conversation mirrors our collective hunger for something real and transformative in a world of superficial connections. When we examine various spiritual traditions around the world, we find a common thread. The divine feminine has often been suppressed or relegated to secondary status. Mary Magdalene's re-emergence into our collective consciousness isn't merely about correcting historical inaccuracies. It represents a profound rebalancing that many believe is essential for humanity's spiritual evolution. I've spoken with numerous spiritual seekers who describe their discovery of Mary Magdalene's true significance as nothing short of a revelation. One woman told me, "Finding Mary Magdalene was like finding a missing piece of myself. She helped me understand that my spirituality could be embodied, passionate, and deeply personal." This sentiment echoes across generations and denominations. The hidden truth here transcends religious boundaries. Mary Magdalene's journey offers us a template for integration of masculine and feminine, of spirituality and physicality, of contemplation and action. In a world increasingly divided, her story provides a pathway toward wholeness. What makes this spiritual reawakening particularly meaningful is its grassroots nature. This hasn't been orchestrated by religious institutions or academic elites. Instead, it represents a genuine uprising of spiritual hunger among ordinary people seeking deeper connection with the divine. From book clubs to meditation circles, from art studios to churches, people are engaging with Mary Magdalene's legacy in profoundly personal ways. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining how Mary Magdalene's teachings offer practical wisdom for navigating our complex modern lives. Her approach to spirituality was never about escape from the world, but rather about bringing divine consciousness into everyday experience. This integration of the sacred and mundane offers us a roadmap for authentic living that resonates with contemporary seekers regardless of their religious background. If you're finding this perspective on Mary Magdalene speaks to something deep within you, write "Wisdom Recovered" in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from those of you who've stayed with me through this exploration. If Mary Magdalene's story has awakened something within you, perhaps a curiosity about the divine feminine, or a desire for more integrated spirituality, I hope you'll continue this journey with me. This channel is dedicated to uncovering these spiritual truths that transcend religious boundaries, yet speak to our deepest human needs. If you haven't subscribed, yet consider joining our community of seekers as we explore these ancient wisdoms and their modern applications. If something in today's message resonated with your own spiritual journey, simply write "Wisdom Recovered" in the comments. It's always meaningful to know which aspects of these stories touch your hearts. And if you found value in our exploration today, leaving a like helps others discover this conversation too. I've created another video that examines how other powerful feminine, spiritual figures have been misunderstood throughout history. You'll find fascinating parallels to Mary Magdalene's story. Click right here, and let's continue uncovering these hidden spiritual treasures together.